Hello, everybody. Hopefully, you can hear me. My name is Ron Murray. I am with the Nps Media Group. I'm here to chat about COVID-19 and its impact on retail sales to date, especially relative to the magazine category. Um, as I said just a second ago, I am with NPS Media Group. We've been around since 1981 trying to help publishers with their needs, whether it's at retail or in subscriptions. Um, we have a staff of 7 people who work on newsstands specifically. We have about 30 or so clients at newsstand of all different sizes, from very small titles or niche titles that have very specific distribution to titles that have very large distribution footprints, you know, putting out over 100,000 copies an issue. And what we do is we work on every aspect of newsstand for them. Prior to NPS, I was with Meredith for 16 years. And while at Meredith, my responsibility was for the book and magazine departments. It was over $5 million worth of retail volume that we were handling back then. Large part of the responsibility was trying back then to determine how best to distribute content, whether it be in a book format, magazine, bookazine, SIP. And a lot of that experience that I have from Meredith has carried over now to my days here with NPS. We help a lot of clients with not only publishing regular frequency titles, but we also get heavily involved in assisting them in determining if there's a way to print content, whether it be in an SIP, bookazine, or journal format. The reason why I mention this is just so you know that our team has a lot of experience across many different channels of sale at retail, whether it's, bookstores, independent newsstands, supermarkets, mass merchants like Walmart, dollar stores. We even do international sales, helping publishers export copies. Conversely, we do the opposite. We have a number of UK clients where we help them to export here into the US. And then across our array of clients, we then also have a vast experience with many different types of magazines from an editorial standpoint. Very niche titles to mass market across all different types of editorial categories, from food and gardening to health, fitness, spirituality, crafts. Pretty much you name the category, and our team is touching it. So, as a backdrop, I wanted to mention all of that just so you know that when we now start talking about COVID-19 and its impact on retail right now, I want to use that backdrop of their experience so that you could see that we have a wide array of touch points at retail, which gives us a wide array of observational knowledge and real pure data knowledge, which I'll share with you in a few minutes. Um, first off, my observation is that it was around the third week of February of this year is when we started to notice shopping patterns change dramatically here in the US and in Canada. Um, and a lot of that was due to, obviously, at that time, the federal government and then local governments obviously were focused on COVID-19, on what might happen in all of our lives, and what impact it would have as far as whether it be stay at home or not. So as that discussion was going on throughout the media and throughout communities, people started taking notice, and around that third week of February, traffic in supermarkets, mass merchants like Walmart, drugstores, and dollar stores picked up dramatically. People started stockpiling paper goods, whether it be tissues, paper towels, toilet paper, also started stockpiling on disinfectants. And then people started stockpiling a lot on basic needs for around their house, pantry items. We didn't know it at the moment, but a few weeks later, we found out through Nielsen data that sales of products, especially paper goods, were increasing by over 1,000%, which obviously highly indicated what was going on and what people were buying, but also indicated that there was going to be a supply channel problem. I'm sure many of you have experienced this where you've walked into a Sam's Club or a Costco and saw that, paper towels were not there, not to be found. Um, Paper good manufacturers did make up for that quantity very quickly, and the supply channel has been continuing, has stayed open through this whole time. As this relates to magazine sales, what we noticed is starting that third week of February and following for the next 4 to 5 weeks into the third week of March, sales of magazines at retail actually were increasing. We saw increases of 8% for 3 weeks straight, and then there was a 6% increase on the fourth week. And when I say an increase in sales, this is all commodity volume. All magazines sold at all retailers during those 4 weeks increased by this amount, which is a dramatic statement considering, for the last, 5 to 10 years, magazine sales at retail have been in have been declining. And it's also significant because the first 5 to 6 weeks of this year, magazine sales were actually in an upswing. There were two events that happened that were driving sales. First, when Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl, sales not only in the Midwest area, but even in surrounding areas, increased dramatically. And then not too long after that, with the passing of Kobe Bryant, quite a number of publishers put out specials and commemoratives on Kobe Bryant. And for those few weeks prior to that, magazine sales were up double digit in the 11 to 15% range. So when we saw sales go up thereafter due to COVID by, as I said, 8%, this was on top of strong selling weeks the 2 weeks prior. Since then, from the last week in March to the current time, we've seen sales drop off a bit. We're now looking at sales decreasing for magazines by about 11% over the last almost 4 weeks. And mainly that's due to, once again, people had stockpiled so much that then their weekly shopping trips turned into fill-ins. And then also, right around that time is when you saw in early to mid-March is when quite a number of states, especially here in the Northeast, I live in New Jersey, but especially here in the Northeast and many other states, is when stay-at-home curfews started. So when those stay-at-home curfews started, obviously people were not going out as often. Um, a key thing to note below those numbers, since I'm giving you all commodity volume, was how these sales changed by class of trade. Um, Supermarket sales, mass merchant sales, drugstores, and dollar sales all were up. Dollar stores the most. Dollar stores actually are still up, even though supermarket sales and mass merchant sales and drugstore sales have declined over the last 3 weeks. Dollar store sales are way up. In the last week that we have data, they were up 18% dollar stores. Conversely, bookstores such as Barnes& and Noble, Books A Million, Chapters Indigo up in Canada are way off for a number of reasons. I'll get into that in a few minutes. In addition, airport sales, at Hudson News and Paradise and other local airport stores are also significantly off, which obviously makes sense because in these stay-at-home conditions, people cannot, in many cases, and in some cases just will not travel. So those two classes of trade are way off, but the overall effect is that due to the high amount of grocery stores out there and Walmarts, that it's offset the decline at bookstores and in airports. Um, the other thing we've noticed is that during this time frame, outside of magazine sales, for the first 2 months of this year, January and February, um, book sales have increased. Sales for books during these 2 months are up 3.5%. However, once again, once you go underneath those macro trends, what you'll see is that books for children's sales are up 7%. So that's helped to drive that dramatically. And obviously, part of that is due because in the month of February, in anticipation of stay-at-home dictums and also the possibility that not stores, but schools were going to be closed, people started going out there buying more children's books. We do not have data yet for the month of March, but I would anticipate, and that data comes in, that book sales may still be up, but the shift will have happened more so from going in stores, from stores to online sales. We've already been observing that online sales for books and placing orders for Amazon and bnn.com have showed good velocity, but we haven't seen those trends just yet. Um, so that's a short recap there of how sales are responding thus far. Now what I'd like to do is just touch on what's happening out there with the stores themselves. Um, so in March is when we started seeing a lot of activity as we were working on print orders for our clients. We were staying close to magazine wholesalers and retailers to see what the status was of their store conditions so that, obviously we could respond accordingly in sending print orders for newsstand for clients. And it started, basically around the third week of March, and that's when Barnes and Noble um, made the decision to stop all shipments of magazines into the stores. The reason why they were doing this at the time is because store traffic had been so low, they did not want to continue to receive inventory and then have that inventory not be able to sell, or um, since they were starting to close stores and their staff was being furloughed, they didn't want to have just inventoried magazines laying at the delivery doors there. Um, so that's when Barnes and Noble stopped, magazine shipments. And then a week later, so that was March 23rd, and just a short week later, they made the announcement that 400 of their stores were closing. At that point in time, at the end of March, basically just a short month ago, they still had over 200 stores open, but traffic was way down. And when they closed their stores, a lot of that had to do with, once again, local community curfews in place that identified Barnes and Noble as a non-essential retailer. Now, being in the magazine and book business, I would highly argue that point. I know we can go into a liquor store and buy beer and wine. Why can't we go to a bookstore and buy a nice magazine or a book? So anyhow, that's my viewpoint, but I guess I'm biased that way. But I do wish we could have changed that decision going forward, but it is what it is. And then around that same time, the second largest book chain in America, which is Books A Million, they have approximately 250 stores throughout America. Most of them are in the Southeast and Southwest. And Books A Million, actually, they built their business on drafting off of Walmart. Most of their stores, nearly all of them actually, are in the same shopping mall or strip mall as a Walmart or nearby in an adjoining one. And they started going through similar problems as Barnes and Noble was going. So on March 24th, they announced that 87 of their stores had to close. Then a short week later, the 1st of April, they announced that they were closing down 150 of their stores due to local community curfews. So 150 of their 250 stores will close down, and as we stand today, just nearly all of their stores are actually closed down also, meaning it's another venue where publishers are not able to ship product. And then even earlier than this, the Canadian bookseller Chapters Indigo, which has over 150 stores up in Canada, they announced on March 18th that they were going to suspend all shipments of magazines. Their stores were open at the time, but once again, because of low traffic flow, they decided that they did not want to receive any magazines, once again, to save inventory levels, didn't want to have magazines arrive and have no or low sell-throughs. So those are the three main book chains and what's happened with them since then. As a result, we as magazine publishers have not been able to allocate copies to book chains. Relative to airports, Hudson News is the largest airport retailer out there. They have well over 300 locations throughout North America. On March 16th, they already started to see very dramatic decreases in airport traffic and employment. And they requested that we as publishers reduce allotments to their stores by 30%. Then 10 short days later, on March 26th, the traffic dropped off so dramatically that they then requested that allotments and quantities be restricted and cut back by 80%. That's how much the traffic was slowing down. As an example, I'll give you one example anecdotally. The Pittsburgh airport. On any given typical day before all this happened, there were 26 passengers per day traveling through the Pittsburgh airport. And for the last 3 weekends, there's only been 5,000 people traveling through the airport for the whole weekend. So you could see that's a dramatic decrease in people going into an airport to travel. And as a result, that's why the airport class of trade is basically for magazines closed down right now, and obviously for all other products and goods. So, so when it comes to magazines allocating copies, if you're, trying to, once again, anticipate a print order for an upcoming issue, what we, have to do is just work on the best information we have today and what we can do for tomorrow. Um, as far as the impact, I mean, obviously, if you're a large mass market magazine title and you have high enough volumes in supermarkets and mass merchants and drugstores and dollar stores, you're still allocating a substantial amount of copies probably. You are cutting back. Although you may have copies going into supermarkets and Walmart, it would be our suggestion, and many publishers are doing this, so that you still would want to cut back a bit because of the uneasiness and knowing how much store traffic there will really be going forward as the stay-at-home mandates continue. And obviously, the smaller publishers, anybody who's a niche publisher, obviously heavily reliant on bookstores, those publishers are really impacted dramatically. We've noticed on quite a number of our clients that some clients on this who are niche, heavily reliant on bookstores, actually some of them have been skipping issues at newsstand and perhaps just serving subs only. But obviously, if there's enough copies that they can distribute where there's a good economy of scale on the revenue side, they are still distributing. And then if you're a craft publisher, one of the trends we've seen too is that the two main craft retail chains out there, Joann's and Michael's, are in a similar condition as the bookstore class of trade, and that is many of them, many of these stores have suspended shipments of magazines because of low store traffic, and now many of them have closed. So if you're a craft publisher and you're in both Barnes& and Noble, Books A Million, Joann's, and Michael's, and you earned them in the past, just about nearly all of your print orders been, now negated because of these closures. For those stores that are open, and for those publishers that are still accessing these classes of trade that have foot traffic, our observations are the following as far as what's working. Um, puzzles, puzzle books or puzzle magazines are doing really well right now. Obviously, people are looking for something to do when they're home, so Sudoku and Search a Word, especially, are really picking off right now. Another category of titles that are doing very well are coloring titles or coloring books. If you remember a few years ago, about 3, 4 short years ago, coloring books had taken off dramatically in the US and in Canada, and they were doing very, very well. It was just, the whole adult coloring craze sort of preceded what I would consider the mindful approach out there in health. And sales were doing very, very well. And then, peaked very quickly and then decreased, but they've now picked up again this last month or so. When you look at the overall increases in magazine sales that we saw those first 4 weeks, starting in February, the third week of February, a lot of what was driving it was puzzle book sales, adult coloring book sales too. We've also noticed that children's titles, food titles, and gardening titles are actually working very well right now. Once again, this to me seems to be a focus on at home. Obviously, if you can't go to a restaurant these days, which you cannot, you can do takeout, but you can't sit down. Cooking and meal preps at home are way up. And as a result, we've seen cooking titles or sales, which have been in decline for the last few years, mainly due to the competition. There's just so many cooking titles out there that we have seen cooking titles. And similarly with gardening, I was just at Lowe's this past weekend, and Lowe's is still open, and getting a lot of gardening materials. And there are a lot of people now focused on their garden because you really can't venture out too far from home. So we are seeing that. Um, and that's the other trend that we have seen. And then I guess to close now, looking forward. Um, Obviously, if I could predict when the economy is going to open up again and when the government's going to, start pulling back from stay at home, I guess if I could predict that, I might not be here talking to you all today. I might be speaking to other people and getting paid a lot more money. But since I can't predict that, I can only go based on anecdotal information we're receiving. Just late yesterday, I was in communication with Barnes& and Noble. They are closely in touch with many communities across America, as they should be. And as of late last night, they're anticipating that within the next 3 weeks, they may start opening some stores again. Now, we don't have that list of stores, we don't have the communities yet, but I took that as very good information and a very good sign that if Barnes& and Noble is looking to start opening stores in the next 3 weeks, that would be really good. Um, Similarly, with Books A Million, we have heard the same thing. And it seems like in the bookstore class of trade that the hopeful date that when they'll start being able to be more fully operational will be starting in June. We also anticipate that that would be around that time is when, as more stores open, bookstores, Joann's, Michael's, as stores do open, hopefully starting in June, and people start feeling that there's more of a normal feel to life. Obviously, it would be a new normal of some sort, but when that happens, we do anticipate that store traffic across other classes of trade, supermarkets and mass merchants and drugstores will then start to flow into more even levels, meaning it'll get back to normal patterns from the past as opposed to, these blips in stockpiling followed by the decreases where people just stop visiting stores. So from a future looking standpoint, I do think that June could be, and hopefully will be, the month where we start to see stores opening. Um, and I would highly recommend that any of you who are out there on the circulation side, and whether you're a publisher, consultant, even associations, as you're talking to people, just, I would stay very close to, um, the media, look for information that's out there, any newsletters that you receive, and just stay close to those information points to see what information is being had as far as when stores are opening. Obviously, there'll be a lot of media coverage on these issues. And, I'll do my very best to communicate with this organization here. I'll stay close to people. As we hear things, we'll communicate with you guys, if you will like, as far as what we're hearing out there when stores are opening. I see a couple of questions are coming in. Um, and one of them is, what concerns are out there as far as people are browsing through magazine racks, if they're picking up a magazine and putting it back, what impact that might have on people. No specific knowledge on that just of yet. We've heard about that. I know Barnes and Noble and the airport retailers are very concerned about it. I don't know if there'll be any disinfecting that will go on the racks as far as spray disinfectants that will help people. But I do think what may happen is, as we get more testing in place and we find out how more prevalent COVID really is than we fully understand it right now, that hopefully there'll be more of what we call that herd immunity going on. And as that happens, it will give people more confidence that, look, if I may have already had this disease, or maybe I've been tested and already do have had it, and as that builds up the herd immunity, and as communication goes out about that, hopefully that'll give people more and more confidence, not only in the upcoming months, in the upcoming years, but until then, my guess is there probably will be some practice in place that retailers may have to place as far as, disinfecting the racks in some way. Although I guess I would say that supermarkets and mass merchants to date have not had to do this at all just yet. But, more so that's a grab and go environment as opposed to magazine where it's a grab, look at and put it back. Hopefully I've answered that question. Another question coming in is, do we see any possibility for increased display area for newspapers and magazines? That's a really good question. Just so you know, as an industry, we've been working very closely with quite a number of retailers. Walmart specifically as being one of them. Over the past few years, Walmart's been pulling back on space. But there's a number of industry initiatives in front of Walmart, Sam's Club, plus some other independent retailers out there to increase the space and even start allocating space. Through a few wholesalers, we've also been working with them on getting in touch with independent bookstores who currently don't even sell magazines, trying to get them involved in this. And the reason why we're doing this is, one of the studies we've noticed is on media consumption since COVID. And one of the most recent studies pointed out that a younger audience is now relying more on traditional media, such as newspapers, magazines, and radio for information, which is a good sign. Hopefully there will be a carryover effect on that. And if that's the case, we can take that information to retailers and ask them to be expanding space. So hopefully that will happen and continue. Um, And I see some more questions. Maybe somebody jumped on later, but the question was, do we expect Barnes& and Noble to start accepting magazines for June? And I don't know if I would use the word expect, but as I said earlier, the term would be more hope. Once again, in speaking to Barnes& and Noble yesterday, that is their hope that by June they'll be able to start accepting magazines, and many more of their stores will be open. Um, and then another question is coming up as far as digital only media. Obviously, digital's been out there for a while now, and to me, I still think that digital will always be part of the mix of distributing content. It's a great option for people who want to get instantaneous content, obviously, delivered to them. Read it, have it as quickly as possible. Um, but I still do think that print is going to be a very important part of distributing and disseminating content. Main reason to me, especially when you look at newsstand these days, a large part of the mix of magazine sales at retail these days has turned to SIP or bookazine or one-shot publishing. And in many cases, those types of publications are very difficult to pull in digitally. I'll go back to the early part of my discussion when I mentioned back in February, magazine sales spiked, double digit, 15 to 18%, when quite a number of publishers published Kobe Bryant tributes. And obviously the month before when the Kansas City Chiefs won. So it's very difficult in those instances when there's a special event to just pull something in digitally. People want to go out into a store and pull in something about their favorite sports team, or if it's another category that's very popular with SIP publishing and one shots is the history category. When it's an anniversary of a historical event, people are quite people are very, very intense about trying to find that information, and it's hard to find digitally. Usually, it's more receptive to them to go to a Barnes and Noble and pick up that 75th anniversary of D-Day issue that they want. So I do think obviously digital is very important. Um, Obviously, if you as a publisher are converting your content into that format, continue to do so. It's a great thing to do, but I do think that magazine sales at retail or in subscriptions are still going to be there for a while and obviously very needed. Um, well, I think, unless I don't see any other questions, I think I've answered them all. Um, I want to very much thank you all for your time, your attention. Wish you all very much, the best of health during these times that we're faced with. And please be safe out there. And as you're out there, we're all in this together, not only from a health standpoint, but in this community we're all in this together for magazine publishing. So anything that you could do to advocate to somebody else to pick up a magazine, whether it's subscribing or whatever it may be, please do so. Once again, thank you very much for your time. Be safe out there.